Sorry, guys. It's not gonna work. It could be a huge deal for reducing emissions, but the numbers just don't add up.
We've solved hard problems before, but none as important as this. The scientists have spoken, it's going too slow. Have I lost my flow? Am I part of the problem? I've spoken, got it wrong and ended up embarrassed. Define myself by what I can't do, focused on what fell through. But we only fail when we don't try. Despite the hiccups and mistakes that may surround us, if we can still generate new thoughts, we are boundless. If we share our ideas, let our teachers teach and our preachers preach, our new heights are reached, for we dared to dream, we are not only brave, we are powerful. Together, we will power the change.
Well, good morning and welcome. Thank you for joining us. My name is Jonathan Minnett. I work for Aker Solutions in business development, and I'm really pleased to be able to kick off today's event, which we're hosting in collaboration with Renewables UK. Today, we're putting the spotlight on collaboration. We see collaboration as a key to moving forward in the energy transition and being a catalyst to do that as effectively as possible. We've got a great number of panelists and speakers from the industry who can talk with authority on the change that we're currently going through, the technology opportunities that are there, and speak with, again, authority and real case studies that are moving forward live today. So, welcome with us today, and I have the privilege of introducing our CEO, Mr. Kjetil Digre, and he is going to be interviewed by Renewables UK CEO, Dan McGrail.
Thank you, Jonathan, and welcome everybody to day 5 at the Energy Transition Hub, where behind us the negotiations continue to keep 1.5 alive. I was attending a CBI dinner last night where 600 business leaders from around the world were assembling to discuss climate change, and which perhaps just shows how the matter of energy transition is at the front and centre of boardrooms around the world. And whilst I was there was an excellent keynote speech from John Kerry, and he spoke with the insight and wisdom that you would expect from a COP veteran, and he also gave a pretty optimistic, cautiously optimistic perhaps, outlook of the negotiations happening over the river behind us. But one of the consistent threads that came out in his speech was this idea of just transition. And of course, just transition means different things to different people. If on one hand, supporting developing nations with their plans to electrify their economies and to, of course, decarbonise. But bringing it closer to home for the UK and for, especially here in Scotland, the topic of transitioning companies and workers from oil and gas into renewables is very high on the agenda. And that affects companies large and small. And today I'm pleased to be joined by Kjetil Digre, CEO of Aker Solutions, as one of the largest companies in the sector. A company that's been present here in the UK for over 40 years in oil and gas, and very active in renewables over the last few years. So I'm delighted to chat through the topic. Kjetil, welcome.
Thank you.
Aker Solutions has been for decades in the oil and gas industry. So can you tell me a little bit about Aker Solutions and your new strategy and how you're evolving into renewables?
Yeah, I think first of all, the Aker System, a group of companies, really Norwegian-based, close to 200 years of industrial history, known for actually taking challenges head-on, starting with hydropower, shipping, and then into oil and gas and other parts of the energy sectors, and the way that the group have been able to take on those challenges, seek the sort of opportunities and then transform again and again and again, I think is part of the DNA of this group of companies. And Aker Solutions is, I guess, you could call it the main sort of execution muscle and competence pool for executing on those industrial projects. And then a place like this gives us a lot of sort of energy and inspiration, because we are really fond of actually looking at the bigger lines, the dilemmas, the policies, which is really being solved and debated here, and then how that translates into sort of a setting where we're actually trying to find out how to do things. And that leads me to Aker Solutions, because we are really the sort of the solution makers, solution finders. We are a big company that, as you alluded to, starting from oil and gas. And then gradually over the years, we have sort of grown competence and positions within some of the renewables areas. And then last year, where everything happened and everything was so strange, in the middle of the summer, we decided to spin off some of the companies around the renewables areas. We created this carbon capture company. We also created Aker Offshore Wind and Aker Clean Hydrogen. That made us an even clearer pure play type of contractor, supplying to all these different sectors. And then our strategy then is really, and I think it's described in a very good way with this sort of just transition, that we are looking at who we are, what we know, what's our sort of credibility from oil and gas, the disciplines, the products, and how that is going to stay within oil and gas for decades, but become more and more low carbon versions of the solutions we provide for customers. And then on top of that, grow positions, grow technology, grow relations into the new energy verticals, renewables and others. So that's the sort of the main strategy path for us. And then just transition is really talks to us, because we won't leave anything behind. I think we really see the uniqueness of what we've been establishing in oil and gas, and how that is really relevant for the new, all the new areas and all the new needs from these renewable sectors. So yeah.
It sounds like it's the structure and the strategy in terms of these new companies, very clearly identifiable brands associated with them, that helps create a lot of focus within the organisation, and I get the sort of the logic behind that. So as you've done that, will you continue to focus as much as you have on oil and gas in the coming years?
Yeah, with 2020 again, as this reset, the activity level was changing and dropping all across the board within oil and gas and elsewhere. And we then tried to understand what's happening. Is this also going to go through this big transition? What we've seen is that reset has now occurred, and it's coming back. The known projects around the world, and then our key clients are back with an agenda within oil and gas, particularly in some of the core areas that we are present, like in Norway. But then with some new requirements, some new sort of agenda items when we meet them, and it all starts by looking at the way we are doing things, what we are designing and building together, and then is that as sustainable with as low carbon footprint as we can achieve, or not, and more not than yes, actually. So we are really sort of pushing new solutions within the oil and gas space, and we will not leave that area. We are relevant for so many of these new projects coming in that sector. We will grow the company on average 10% a year going forward, and that growth will mainly come from renewables areas. But stay in oil and gas, grow the competence and the relations there, but then also bring them into these renewables areas.
So that's quite an aggressive sort of top line growth at 10%, and that's sort of really positive to hear that it's coming from renewables, certainly from my point of view. But there's a lot the renewable sector can learn from oil and gas. So how do you see how the two industries, oil and gas and renewables, can work together and your theme here is collaboration. So how can we work together to accelerate the transition to net zero?
Well, I'm Norwegian, come from Norway, and one of the dilemmas I feel is that when we are really trying to get going on the renewables area, with guts and power, really seek opportunities there together. I think that is a stronger drive and a better version of collaboration if we're also talking about the oil and gas part of the energy mix. Because in Norway, I think we are 230,000 directly employed in oil and gas. If you're going to grow as we want in renewables, that is going to take a lot of heads and hands, to perform. And that is really going to be based on many of the 230,000 in oil and gas. Yeah. It doesn't add up if you don't look at it that way. It's the right disciplines, it's the right companies in there, it's the setup with a well-trained supply chain. So I think that's the first topic. And I think, if you look at it, and this is my version of wind describing what has happened, but onshore wind has sort of been creeping out towards the beach, getting some water around their legs, and then you start getting new kind of challenges that needs to be handled cautiously by increasing quality. And now if this is going to move even further out, and eventually then float in harsher environment, I have this mental picture of actually the renewable space as it has been is actually meeting up and matching well with oil and gas coming from the other side. And I think the biggest challenge for us as a company just now is to maintain a dialogue of the whole energy mix. Mm-hmm. That's the solution. That's where we want to be. But then we also need to change so that we are closing the gap and become perhaps a bit sort of leaner version of ourselves to be competitive and relevant in the renewable space.
I think it reminds me of a phrase that was used when I worked in a turbine manufacturer a number of years ago when we were moving to the beach and then getting into the water, mm-hmm. which was that we don't want to get our feet wet. Oh. And that's where the role of companies like Aker Solutions is so important, because you're so used to working in the marine environment. Yep. It's easier said than done, though, isn't it? Because if you look at your organisation, which is tens of thousands of people, and you transition those people towards where the market is growing, that isn't so straightforward, at a human level. So how do you go about that process of training, developing people? Because even though there's a lot to be learned and collaboration can lead to a lot, the industries are different, the risk profiles are different. So how do you go about that and developing your people?
I think that's an excellent question. I'm not sure I've solved it yet, but I think that some main focus areas for me is that we have a clear sort of change agenda and a strategy for how to do it on company level. We see that we're doing it at the same time as our sort of key clients are doing it. So really work on that change together. Discussing openly the dilemmas that we actually see is one important tool in my toolbox, really. So we invite for collaborating not only into projects and the likes, but also on this change and understanding the change methods and what's working and what's not. So and that's one thing. And the other thing is to sort of agree that we need to discuss the true dilemma of having a total energy mix relevant for decades to come, and how this is sort of gradually going to turn. And the reason why, at least from my Norwegian experience, this is important is that we have to make sure that you don't create two different teams. So me and the others type of thinking, because of the growth, because of the positive atmosphere, like you alluded to, from the likes of John Kerry around this. I think we see a sort of drive and momentum towards these areas, but we need them where they have been as well in oil and gas. So we can't sort of leave those tasks behind and send talents to the renewables areas without handling the totality. So I think that's also important to handle together as a challenge. So I think those are the two most important things. Yeah.
Thanks for that. I mean, and I think the human side of it is so interesting in this as companies change. But bringing it maybe closer to home, obviously we're here in Glasgow. People in Glasgow have always thought that Glasgow is the centre of the universe, of course, and with good reason, because it was very much at the heart of the Industrial Revolution. And but we are here today because of COP26. But it happens to be the UK, and the UK and offshore renewables and offshore oil and gas has been quite a big market, I'd suggest. So as you look forward, you run a global company based in Norway. You cast your view around the world. What makes the UK such an interesting market?
starts by, me being Norwegian. I know that we are really well linked to Scotland, for instance, where a lot of things are happening. So I think we know that we can collaborate. We have a history of doing that together in a really sort of constructive way. Next is that we're sharing the basin of the North Sea, and I know that means that we are not only linked through tasks, but also physically in many ways. So looking at combined cases where you take wind for oil, for instance, the power transmission, the infrastructure, we can really start to look at sort of connected cases between countries. And then we're obviously present in UK, and we've been for decades, and I guess you could summarize it in 3 buckets. We have an engineering activity, which is going to be more and more sort of the center of excellence of some of the product areas that are relevant for the renewable space. And we're going to grow that engineering muscle also into consultancy. We have the big subsea organization, and the reason why that is relevant is, if you look again at sort of products constituting a classical subsea oil and gas field, and then also the new stuff we are doing on the seafloor, for instance, within gas compression. There's so many competence areas and products that are relevant for, I guess, sort of newer versions of, for instance, floating offshore wind. And then thirdly, we have a great organization working on the operation and maintenance side, where we're also looking at taking roles for the different players within offshore wind particularly. So, and we're going to grow this in the UK.
That's good to hear. It's good to hear. And of course, as a solutions company, our interest in Renewable UK very much around the future of wind and floating wind and offshore wind in general and onshore, but also interested in other segments which all fit into the energy transition and the UK's kind of market-led approach to that. So there's different elements, hydrogen, of course, and maybe we'll come back to that in a moment. But another area of regular discussion in the UK is carbon capture and storage. So how do you see the perspectives for that in the UK, and strategically, how are you positioning yourself?
Yeah, I guess the third thing around the UK which makes it interesting, back to your second or the last question, is the way that you're moving. It's not sort of, you're not starting in one part of the problem space here. You're really sort of moving forward aggressively with everything that counts. The policies, the governance, the framework for companies to both be the developers, but also building the industry linked to it. So you're really taking sort of a totality in the transformation, a lot more sort of, what should I say, aggressively in the positive sense. So I think that means a lot. And what we see, our capacities are linked to, discipline areas, expertise, products, but also linked to tying things together when it becomes complex and you need to connect, and then in carbon capture, hydrogen, offshore wind for oil, you see these connected industrial tasks where we can play a huge role. And then into that picture, we also bring our sister company, Aker Carbon Capture, sitting on top of and owning that core technology around carbon capture that we can sort of wrap into total solutions. You put that on top of gas turbines, you link that to hydrogen production, and you see more and more of those sketches coming up, and we are studying them now for our key clients. So I think that's an interesting area.
You mentioned one of the things that was attractive of us was the policy framework, and I'm going to come back to hydrogen in a second, but I'm interested because it's my job and my team's job to kind of hold the government to account. You mentioned the policy and regulatory framework. So as a global CEO, do you see the UK, I mean, there's been quite a lot of political turmoil, should we say, in this country over the last couple of years. How do you rate the policy and regulatory frameworks that you see coming in the UK compared to other markets where you might want to allocate resources and capital?
Oh, that's a good question. I actually talked to your communications man yesterday, and we started talking about differences in how we have mobilized with governance and frameworks for handling these different rounds of applications, the criteria, etc. So, and I feel that you have a matured set of processes and procedures, and roles are defined. You have systems around offshore wind, which sounds like it's sort of triggering the right common drivers, the CFDs and etc. So all in all, in my mind, it seems matured and it's working, and it's, I guess, something that is better to copy than to sort of resist in a way. So and I really like the way that you have the same language around what kind of opportunity this is. You know, it's something that you really want to make the most out of. You're talking about the sense of urgency. You're talking about the collaborational or the necessity to collaborate, and then also this just transition that you want to bring the previous version of us into the future in a sort of responsible way. So I think you have a really good way of talking about the true dilemma, but also the opportunity set in this. So
that's good to hear. That's good to hear. Hopefully that means that we as a trade association doing our job relatively well, and I think that leads neatly onto hydrogen in a way, because if I look back 5 years at the sort of future energy scenarios that we had, hydrogen was either absent or playing a very small role, whereas today, you know, so much of the narrative, and certainly when I've been over there in the blue zone, there's a lot of conversation about hydrogen. Maybe demystify it a little bit for us from your point of view. How do you see it, and the UK context in particular?
Well, I'm not a hydrogen expert. I think I'll start with what we can bring into this. You know, again, the starting point, the totality of things. We have this ability to connect in early, where sort of the sheets are blank, and you start with ideas and a stakeholder landscape that sort of seeks together around some possibilities, and there we can be, you know, the conceptual architects to find the right integrated solution for things, and then we can take that through the different stages of maturing and actually executing it as well. We're not into the sort of the core technology areas. We are more those sort of wrapping that together. In my mind, and the way that I've been involved, particularly in Norway, is that it's so interesting that you have to not only look at the island around the hydrogen itself. You need to broaden out. You need to look at the logistics around it, the infrastructure, the user patterns. It needs to be present in a way. For instance, looking at ships and the routes for transport to also convert over to hydrogen at the same time. So I like the way that we are getting these sort of connected dialogues as a trigger for these hydrogen adventures, to call it that. And then in what we are looking at is to take roles with again our key clients, many of them from oil and gas, when they are now entering into that space, also here in the UK.
And of course, hydrogen is seen as the means by which to decarbonise the hard to electrify sectors. There is a company in this town which advocate, you know, electrifying absolutely everything, and electrification playing, you know, a key role in the future. You know, what are your views on electrification, maybe in oil and gas on one hand, but in wider society, because it's a big challenge, isn't it, in terms of what we need to do?
Yeah. Well, it's becoming all electric, most of this, you know, and perhaps some places a bit too slow. But back to the fact that we stay in oil and gas, we want to be a low carbon solution provider, and we are doing so. And then I guess starting on the Norwegian continental shelf, we're really key to bring power from shore out to many of these both new installations, but also the old ones. And we see now that those kind of activities picking up. That makes a lot of sense. You move a problem to a place where it's easier to create carbon capture solutions and also more higher efficiency. But it also triggers a lot of debate. You know, where do you send your electrons, and who's going to have them, and what are they going to cost? So you see many of those problems coming. And then we see a lot of new competence areas needed. We don't have all of them. And I think, you know, to the whole sort of UK agenda we have and entering into renewables, the way of seeking partnerships so that you find complementary partners, both value-wise and what we offer together, and then link up to sort of seek these new solutions. And we have excellent partnerships going, and we're going to talk about some of them here today.
Yeah. I'm just talking about partnerships, and the UK and Norway are increasingly doing more business together in many respects in the area of low carbon. I think Kwasi Kwarteng was in Norway either earlier this year, late last year, signing an MOU with the Norwegian government. There's interconnection. But Norway's been zero carbon or very low carbon for a very long time when it comes to the energy system. What lessons do you think there are for the UK, or what can we learn from each other in terms of our approaches?
Oh, it's an excellent question. And I think, when I'm back in Norway, one thing that I want to be part of the debate now is for us not only to discuss how we, through initiatives in Norway, are becoming an even larger provider of clean energy, because we have the hydropower and now we can see other things coming as well. So that becomes sort of a power agenda and our role in Europe, for instance. But I really want that parallel discussion around building industry.
Yeah.
And I think that's the key role we have some stabilizing roles, in the European setting with what we can provide. But I think perhaps the key sort of solution that we can come with from Norway is actually the knowledge, the technologies we create in a sort of Norwegian setting where we can pilot, we have funds to do some technology bets and grow competence.
Yeah.
And those solutions then gets in place, and I think the way that we can export those to where it's needed, I think is the key role for Norway to take. Yeah, because as you say, we are at the right end of the scale when it comes to our CO2 footprint and the likes. But that's not the main debate. That's not the main contribution. That I think is people, it's technologies and competence
and innovation, and
yeah.
and that leads to supply chain. And this is kind of a big narrative for us in the UK, particularly in the wind industry, where, rightly or wrongly, early development of offshore wind in the UK was criticised for not creating enough local jobs. But how, maybe both from a Norwegian perspective, but also thinking about the UK opportunity and the scale of things here, how do you see the opportunity for supply chain, and what does that mean to you as a solutions provider of having a strong indigenous supply chain?
Yeah. I think, again, our company, what we're good at is, to take the totality, the total responsibility, EPC, be the integrator, be the sort of the hub for the rest of the supply chain towards a client. And where we are just now is to make sure that we have a delivery model suited for oil and gas, and we are now entering into offshore wind, hydrogen, carbon capture, and obviously learning, but also changing delivery models suited for those different areas to become competitive. And as part of that is, to find out the right set of suppliers that ticks off in the right boxes, and also then start to work together in some new ways. We are maturing, developing the digital toolbox, which is, amongst others, really sort of focused on how we tie that sort of network and the puzzle of suppliers into sort of a more digital collaboration. So as an example of how we need to work to become more competitive together. And I think we have a story of we are a bit sort of Norwegian based, the culture, the way that we enter into a collaboration, and we want to be open, we want to grow, we want to create sort of win-win settings with those we onboard together with us. And we also see that we have to learn now around the way that we are running our own business. We have set a target that we will cut our own footprint in half by 2030 and net zero by 2050. And we are going to sort of bring that out there as sort of demands for our suppliers, but then even more a demand, we're going to help each other to achieve it, build competence and consciousness around what matters, which solutions counts. So that is, I think, at least some topics I bring with me when I look at growing the supply chain.
So that's a neat segue to the sort of last question, really, which is about behaviours. I mean, this is a change in time we're living through. Obviously, we talked about sort of the integration of different industries and the need for everyone's minds to come into this. So, what do you think the kind of key behaviours that we need to see are? And from a personal point of view, what are you focused on in terms of tackling climate change?
I think the times I've felt that I really were part of solving something was when I didn't think that I had all the right answers. I was better than my next guy, but where I really took on something and were humble. This is not solvable by only me. This comes with some challenges that I don't know everything about. It could come with some opportunities that I can't seek alone. So the way of sort of opening up around what we have ahead of us, one task, several tasks, I think is key. And when things are going to change as fast as it is now, and we want to be part of that, with our clients and in the supply chain, in sort of a network of players, I think you need to be open and invitational in how to tackle that. And I think I want to work with people and companies that have the right set of values. They have sort of realized that this is actually happening. They are taking responsibility for the total energy mix. They don't have to be in every segment, but they have to realize that this totality that we have to handle, both on the political side, but also when finding industrial solutions. So, and then from there and onwards, seek win-wins. Because it's slightly different, both margins and the likes when going from oil and gas to renewables. And in renewables, we really need to have control over how we do things to be both competitive and predictable.
I think that's a really nice note on which to end, Kjetil. Thank you so much. Open and invitational, and there's a sense of the humility that we need to work together in collaboration on the things that we don't know, and that's a powerful note on which to end. So thank you, Kjetil Digre, and hope you enjoyed it. There's going to be
So good morning, everyone. My name is Vivian Chan. I'm the Director of Strategy at Doosan Babcock, and I've been following the energy markets quite intently now for the last 15 years or so. So I'm delighted to have been asked to moderate this panel discussion today, which is all about carbon capture, utilisation and storage, and the collaboration that is really needed to deliver it. And carbon capture can really play a crucial role in our energy transition. Already the UK government's Energy White Paper, which was published end of last year, has cited carbon capture and has committed up to £1 billion of investment to establish CCUS in 4 industrial clusters. And furthermore, the Committee on Climate Change has already long said for quite some time now that carbon capture technology is, in their words, a necessity to meet UK's climate change targets. So therefore, I'm really pleased to have 3 companies with me on this panel today who are very much active in this space. And just earlier this year, they joined forces creating a consortium to support the delivery of CCUS in the UK. So joining me today, without any further ado, I have Andrew Colquhoun, who's the Chief Executive Officer at Doosan Babcock, Stephen Bull, Executive Vice President for Renewables at Aker Solutions, and Steve Scrimshaw, who's the Vice President at Siemens Energy Limited. Welcome to you all. Pleased to have you here today. So I've only got 30 minutes and it's a really big topic to unpack here. So why don't we set the scene for everyone by starting with the technology itself. So why are new carbon capture and specifically combined cycle with carbon capture technology and these projects key to achieving net zero? Perhaps Stephen, you could start, and Steve,
sure.
if you follow up with the combined cycle.
I suppose to put it into context, I mean, net zero is a big deal. This means, really not just about the energy we use and how we use energy. It's, what we consume, it's how we farm, it's what we eat, it's how we transport ourselves. There's so many elements around it. So there is no silver bullet at all for this here. I think particularly when we think about the energy business itself, I mean, one of the largest emitters, we've got energy, about 20% of the UK is CO2 emissions, industry around about the same, but transport is a big sector as well. What we can see is that the electrification of transport, of industry, of the heating markets means we're going to see a lot, demand taking off over time. And one of those solutions will be basically carbon capture and storage on the back end of using gas to power, so combined cycle gas turbine technology. And that goes hand in hand with strengthening the grid. It gives dispatchable power when we need it in particular. And again, there's a backup and also a good link to renewables as well. So it's just one of many solutions that we need for net zero.
I think if you build on that, I mean, there's a clue in the name. It's an energy transition. We're transitioning from something that we have today to something different. And what we are doing now, we're moving away from pure CCGTs into CCGTs with carbon capture. You saw the government announce that there will be no unabated gas turbines running after 2035. So that's the significance of it. And then if you also think, if we switch off all of the gas turbines we have in the UK, that's 40% of our generation capacity. So we do need that there. But I think now you can make very high efficiency gas turbines. You can make them cleaner by capturing CO2, which is what we're actually in consortium about. And then the emissions that come out of there, we can store it under the North Sea. And I think you can't be 100% reliant on renewables. You need to have the option to balance the system, as Steven's just said. So I think that's another reason why we want to use CCGTs for this. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's interesting you both mentioned, and I think a big question for many people is that flexibility element and intermittency of renewables. Perhaps could you maybe touch on that a little bit more, on the role that these new technologies will come in and balance renewables? We all know that the wind doesn't always blow and the sun doesn't always shine. So could you maybe elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, I think I mean a big one for us is inertia. So you need inertia on the system to be able to balance the system, and that's something that you can't do with just renewables alone. There are technologies that are evolving, like long-term deep energy storage, batteries and other technologies, but having flexible, low carbon, spinning, large volume energy, that's key for balancing the system in terms of especially inertia.
Maybe just to add a bit on electrification, I think. Again, if we're back into a UK context here, there's 27 million homes in the UK, and 85% of them using gas boilers to heat up the home, plus obviously electricity. And that is equivalent of, a statistic here, but is equivalent of 470 terawatt hours. Now the power demand in the UK today is around about 360 terawatt hours, so basically we need to double that just to actually make that link from going from gas you know, in your homes, over to electricity over time. Again, this is a transition that would take some time. So what we need in that particular space is, you know, the mixture of dispatchable power, as Steve's mentioned, but, you know, obviously growth of offshore wind. And we see, you know, the UK is a leading in offshore wind. We're involved in Aker Solutions in many of those areas. And we will see, you know, maybe 40 gigawatt plus of offshore wind. But to really make that balance up properly, we do need gas technology as well.
Okay. I'll just move quickly on to, you know, how these technologies will then decarbonise the industrial clusters specifically. So how do these projects help support in that decarbonising of these clusters which have been identified by government?
I think I think you need. I think what they do is they give an anchor sort of volume for CO2. So the clusters, the East Coast cluster and HyNet, etc., that have been out there, they do provide that scale to enable those clusters to happen, really, because you've got large volumes of CO2. So it actually helps on the whole economics for the cluster as well. If you think of the ones that we were involved with, you know, Keadby 3, Net Zero Teesside, Peterhead, those types of things, they all will underpin the infrastructure that's needed for the carbon capturing and storage under the endurance gas field. Yeah.
And again, these provide a platform for net zero, as I said. So it's not just actually producing power, you know, with CO2 capture and storage, but obviously we can have a platform here for hydrogen as well. And if you think of the fertilizer business, petrochemicals, steel making, cement production, if we're going to have net zero, good quality jobs in the UK and abroad, then we actually need to find solutions for that. And hydrogen, for example, is another space. So putting this infrastructure together here gives us a base to do that and actually sort of kind of re-industrialise in some sense some of the regions of the UK.
So I do want to get onto your consortium, but I guess one last question, and perhaps it's a bit of an elephant in the room, is, you know, carbon capture technology has been around for quite some time already. So it's reared its head in the past, and I think it's probably fair to say it didn't quite work. Maybe it was too expensive. So why now? Why do you think it's a viable option nowadays, especially in industrial clusters? Is it getting that economies of scale that you mentioned earlier?
I think it is. I mean, there's about 22 large CCS projects in the world, and most of them have been linked to oil and gas, essentially, or to where you've actually had to store CO2 for geological reasons. But what we see now is actually, again, is the whole of industry needs to, you know, it essentially needs to decarbonise. You see that narrative moves away from just the energy industry, but to, as I say, the fertiliser industry, the cement industry to decarbonise, and they need other solutions. And what you do see is that the carbon capture technology today has become much more modular. So rather than a massive unit on the back of a brownfield site, you can integrate them early, as which we're thinking around the consortium to reduce the costs, but also you see smaller scale CO2 capture plants that we could be added on the back there. And this sort of gives that effect, a bit like offshore wind, when you get the same deployment, you start to reduce the costs over time.
I think as well, just to add to that, I think if you want to get to that net zero by 2050, and, you know, all the things that Steve said and all the things we talked about, you know, the amount of things that we have to do to get to net zero, there is less than 1 billion seconds between now and 2050 to get to net zero, and all the things that Steve described have to be done. So, you know, it's not one silver bullet. All of these things have to be done to achieve net zero.
I'd like to know who calculated that seconds. Andy, do you have any comments around the carbon capture before we move on to the consortium?
No, let's just move on to the consortium. I think Steve have covered that.
Yeah. Okay. So let's turn to the consortium, which the three companies had formed. So this is a question to all of you, and perhaps Andy, you can kick us off. Is, you know, how can this consortium support the net zero transition, and if you could add to it, you know, what role does each company play in this consortium?
Yeah, I think, you know, as my colleagues have said, you know, this isn't going to be resolved by one single technology. In the same way, the development of you know, a complex advanced solution isn't going to be sorted by one company. You know, and what we require is companies to come together, you know, collaboration between organisations and industries to bring best practice, experience, skills, capability, and that's what we essentially do. If you look at our Powering Net Zero consortium, we bring together 3 large companies. Between us, we've got 450 years of, you know, legacy in the UK. We've got the ability to deploy 6,500 people in the field. You know, we work across all of the industrial clusters at the moment. I think between us we've got the complementary and supplementary skills that are required to deliver these large first-in-class projects, and we've got a trained industrial workforce that's ready to go and that's ready to deliver some of these big projects in the UK. So from a Doosan Babcock perspective, what do we bring? Doosan Babcock's a proud old engineering company. We've been here 130 years in the UK. We're a service company, but our past is all about designing, constructing, commissioning coal-fired power stations. And we, like many companies, have we have evolved and innovated our business in the past, and we are now on that journey towards supporting decarbonisation and net zero. And we bring to the consortium that construction management and that construction execution of the world-class products that these gentlemen bring to the projects.
Brilliant, thank you. And Steve, perhaps you can.
Yeah, I would agree with what Andy's just said. I think we as the leaders of the individual businesses, we made that commitment that we would come together. I think the more and more you look at some of these technologies that are required for net zero, decarbonisation, etc., it does require collaboration like you've never seen before. So I think you're going to see more of these types of relationships where you can bring shared innovation, those types of things. And we all have that track record that we have of executing projects. It isn't just the execution, but it's like coming together, co-creating, creating something new, and playing to our strengths individually and collectively what our strengths are.
Excellent.
Just to add on that one, again, the Aker Solutions role here is the integrator between Doosan Babcock and Siemens Energy. And so, again, our background is major scale project management, engineering and procurement, construction. So we sort of try and bring together, we can't do this on our own. There's no way we could do this. So bringing us together with our different three strengths is a great way of working. But also is a very efficient way of working towards clients as well. They sort of see us as coming with one voice, and actually sort of one organisation as well. So I think this is something that we're trying to build on and work on and get momentum, and hopefully we can sort of see this as being a real successful way of breaking into a new business model, which not just the UK needs, but many other countries across the world.
I think to add to that as well, we have had relationships. We work extremely closely in our transmission business with Aker Solutions. It's been a tried and tested partnership, and we've worked with others as well. So we're building on that heritage, if you like, to take it to a new level.
No, it's quite impressive statistics. I think, Andy, you mentioned there the number of years and the amount of resources that collectively as three companies already have. I guess if we were to sum up, because there appears to be much more in consortiums, popping up in the industry, because they do recognise that collaboration is absolutely crucial, and they can't do it alone. And I think something you mentioned, Steve, earlier, that we need to go at quite a fast pace to actually go and make this happen. So, what would you say, just to sum up, the real strengths of the consortium, all together as three?
Yeah, I think what we've tried to do, and the three of us have put a lot of effort in, is to try and break down some of the barriers between the organisations, and I think we truly operate as a one team. We're very much focused on having that co-located, single branded organisation. So when we speak to clients, the clients don't recognise instantly that this individual is a Siemens or an Aker employee. They're part of our consortium, and I think we've put a lot of work into relationships, and I think that's starting to bear fruit in some of the work that we're currently doing together across the across the industrial clusters. We are working together on active FEED studies and project opportunities, and I believe it's been well received by our customers.
I think focused on outcomes as well. When we all get together in a room, you wouldn't differentiate which company, organisation we're from. Yep. We're part of this one team focused on the outcomes of what we're trying to deliver for our customers, and I think that's the strength that we bring as a consortium.
Yeah, excellent. I think probably just to add to that as an observation is, maybe proven technologies. Combined cycles have been, around for a very long time. It's not brand new technology in that respect, and it can be, I guess you could just say, it could be used quite quickly and fast and deployed, which is the challenge that UK's got right now, isn't
Absolutely.
it?
Yeah, I think what customers are looking for in these first of a kind projects is predictability, delivery and functionality. And I think with our three organisations, we've got a very strong track record of bringing the best technology and IP together and that delivery and certainty. And I think that goes a long way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe just to add on that one, again, we work closely with a sister company of ours called Arca Carbon Capture, which is part of the Arca family of companies, with a bespoke and distinct IP and expertise around CO2 capture. So it's been tested for decades, and bringing that into the mix with us together and into our consortium, again, it makes it even stronger. And again, it's to give confidence to the customer. Again, these are first of a kind as well. So we've got to break this down. We've got to make it really manageable. Take out as much risk as we can. Give predictability around the project itself and actually the efficiencies. And then again, you hone that in to try and define that even better next time. And again, this is the importance of the cluster projects in the UK, is that we can get that ball rolling, because we need this. We need more of these projects.
Yeah. I think you probably mentioned two words that a finance person would be very happy about, which, as we all know, just a few days ago, the finance day was talked about, and risk and predictability is two major ones. Let's then go on to how these projects can be delivered, because it's a huge undertaking. These are massive capital projects, and it requires, I think you mentioned before, that we need a lot of resource to deliver these projects. And it was mentioned by the East Coast Cluster as a whole, that project will require up to 41,000 resources when the project hits its peak at 2026, which is not too far away. So just on the whole skills agenda and how we actually deliver these projects, how will this consortium support that local supply chain and the resources that are required, should you win any of the new upcoming carbon capture projects? Perhaps Andy, you want to start?
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good question, Viv, and this opportunity that we've got right now is not just about building, projects to meet our climate ambitions. It's much more than that. This is a wonderful opportunity for the UK to develop its supply chain. It's a wonderful opportunity for the UK to put itself in the short window as leaders in this market. It's essential that as we invest into these projects, that we make sure that UK content is mandated, which allows us to, address the government's levelling up agenda, address the Build Back Better programme that the UK government's got in place, and allowed us to build a global supply chain, which we can be proud of. We're all determined as industry leaders to work with and develop the supply chain. It's to help the supply chain get to where they need to be to support us in the delivery of the products, the services, equipment, manufacture, whatever it might be, to deliver these. Because, just as I said earlier, no one company can deliver this, no one consortium can deliver this. We need a fully integrated UK supply chain behind us. And, we're committed to working with the suppliers and the local communities that we operate in, the regions and the national supply chain. So it's a really important part of the project for us.
Yeah, if you want to pick up on that, if you use an example, we've just built a new CCGT power plant at Keadby in Lincolnshire, and it's probably about over $1 billion of lifetime support, and we've really worked hard with the local community and suppliers. So there's probably 70% of that will actually come from local communities, etc. And if you think of that, and you could scale it up to what we're talking about in these carbon clusters, it's really going to be a great opportunity. I personally believe, if you're a youngster now starting out your career, this is a generation of employment, to look ahead to. It's a wonderful opportunity, and I think great opportunity for people.
Sign up to be an engineer.
Exactly.
Where do I sign on the dotted line? Okay. Just to turn to maybe more the kind of skills piece specifically. How do you work with the likes of universities to upskill the next generation? Steve, perhaps if you could.
So, well, if I speak for Siemens Energy, or the Siemens Energy Group, we've got partnerships with universities across the country. We've got around 10 sort of core universities that we work with. We've got something like, we spend about 300 million on university research projects across the UK. We've actually one specific example in Nottingham, we're sponsoring PhD students to look at carbon capture, use and storage, as well as other clean carbon technologies. So from an academic point of view, we do quite a lot of that, and I know Doosan do a lot in the sort of vocational side as well, don't you?
Yeah, you're right, Steve. I mean, it's not just about working with universities and graduates. You know, the amount of infrastructure that the UK is planning to invest in over the next 20, 30 years is going to require a massive amount of construction resource to deliver. And if you consider that, you know, all of the engineers that are currently working in construction today, a fifth of them will be retired by 2026. It leaves a huge, you know, skills and experience gap that we as industry need to fill. Now, one of the things that we do at Doosan Babcock is we've got a world-class training facility at Tipton, and we continue to, you know, push through, you know, the craft and the project control apprentices of the future there, and that's something that we'll continue to support. As Steve mentioned, you know, we're not talking about one-off projects, we're talking about portfolios and programs where people can see they can enter as an apprentice, they can follow defined paths of employment, and they can come out, you know, perhaps at the end of their career as a completely rounded individual. So I think it is a wonderful time to be a youngster, you know, coming into our industry. I don't think there's many better times. We're almost entering a golden age, I feel, and you know, you've heard the commitments that's been made at COP the last few days. There's a green industrial revolution coming, and we need to get ready for it. You know, getting the right people at the right time to deliver these projects will be one of the biggest challenges that we face.
Mm-hmm.
So I hear that, you know, loud and clear, and we've been talking about the collaboration between these three companies. But I see like a huge challenge here, you know, in one project and multiple projects that's really required at pace to deliver net zero. So what sort of signals and commitments or requirements do you need from a wider collaboration community, you know, whether it's from government, from financial institutions, from other supply chain? You know, what is your view in terms of what is required to make this pace of change happen?
You know, I mean, it takes a village, a pretty large village, to try and make this happen, no doubt about it. But I think that's what you see with COP now, and the discussions here in Glasgow, is that this is really about, you know, how you bring government, business together, the finance world. I mean, previously there's been different, you know, with maybe different tracks around these things, but I just see so much more collaboration around it. And I think this is really important, is that there's no turning back. You have to just keep pushing forward, clear signals, which you're getting from the UK government to get these projects going, get them moving, find the right kind of policy frameworks that we can enable them, and also for the finance industry to come into this and actually set themselves into what does it look like in terms of actually de-risking, project financing, developing other types of business models as well, so they can get exposure to this area. But it means that, you know, we have to be much more open about this and more understanding, and actually probably accept a little bit more risk as well. And I think that's what the finance sector also, I think, is really waking up to now.
I think if you sort of maybe just look back a little bit, look what happened in offshore wind. You know, there was some very strong signals sent, this is what we want to do. And if you just look at it now, you know, you've got manufacturing across, you know, multiple sites in the UK. You've got a whole industry, especially in Scotland, has grown up in terms of supporting that. And I think that's where we're at. It's let's get those signals out. Let's get things moving. I hate to say it, but I'm not going to say it, blah, blah, blah. Let's stop the talking. Let's get on with getting some of these things in play, start working. People start believing in them, get behind them. And I think you will see the industries develop from there. I think I think we should always see the offshore wind business as a model that we should aspire to take the good things that they've done and see if we can actually replicate that in this industry as well.
So can we take this a bit further? If you had a magic wand, you know, what is the one thing that you would like action from the government, or whether it's a financial institution? You know, what would you like to see? Because you draw comparisons with the offshore wind industry, and we recognise that it's had a few bumps in the road, but it's gotten to where it's gotten to, and that's great. A lot of that's supported by subsidies, etc. So if you had a magic wand, Steve?
I think, well, it goes back to my pace point. I think the issue of the clusters, the phase one clusters, I think let's get them really moving. Let's not prevaricate around it. I was disappointed to see, you know, I actually lived in Scotland a while ago. You might not think it with the accent, but I would definitely like to see the Scottish cluster accelerated. That's something I would like to see, because they are all going to be needed. And I think if you send those signals out to industry like ourselves, it isn't just financial investment, it's industry investment, it's skills and all the rest of it. And I think you'll see the ball will start rolling very, very quickly. So I think it's, let's just keep the pace up and actually make things happen in accordance with the timelines that we've outlined, and try and accelerate things if we possibly can. I think that's, from my side, that's what I would want.
So I'm going to hold on the magic one question to the other two just now, and I kind of want to, not to pick on you, Steve, but you mentioned about the Scottish industrial cluster. Can we afford to not have the Scottish cluster progress right now?
I think it needs to be progressed. It definitely needs to be progressed, because there's a lot of industry in Scotland. We heard Nicola Sturgeon speak yesterday about the plans for Scotland, and I think it would be a mistake if we didn't get that rolling quickly.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to pass the magic wand to yourself.
Thank you. It's like, it's about deployment.
Yeah.
And again, it's back to the offshore wind story, which is, okay, it's had bumps in the road, but we are just fully, blowing this now in the UK and just leading, globally in terms of that sector and that technology. But I think, again, this comes through deployment, it comes through clear signals, it comes through that there's a clear policy mechanism, there's a contract for difference for offshore wind. So I think what contract or policy mechanism we need for carbon capture and storage, and actually just to show that, okay, we've got these first projects coming through the line, that we see there's coming more and more and more. And again, we just need that, because when industry sees that, then we see there's a pipeline rather than a few one-offs. It will invest time, people, and money into this.
Yeah. And finally, Andy.
Thanks, Viv.
Magic
Yeah,
wand.
my takeaway, probably from COP over the last few days, is that the scepticism is now falling away from politicians, from industrialists. I think there's a consensus now that this is a real issue, maybe more so than it was in previous COPs. And for me, it's now about just getting some of these industrial cluster projects kicked off as quickly as possible. Let's cut our teeth on them and let's start that programme that we need. The sooner we get started, the sooner we can start investing in the skills that we need, investing in the local communities, and meeting our net zero targets. So I'm really optimistic that we're now on the right track.
Good. Well, I think that's a really positive note to end on. Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have today. So thank you all for your time. I think it's clear that there's a really exciting partnership here. And there's lots of opportunity ahead. I think it's also really clear that we need to move really fast, and we need that collaboration not just within this consortium, but also with the wider communities who are going to be taking part in achieving this overall net zero goal. So on that note, thank you all, and I now pass over to Jonathan, who's going to introduce the next session.
Thanks, Viv.
Thank you.
Great to see you back again, and I hope you enjoyed the two sessions we had earlier, if you didn't catch them on the replay. As I mentioned, it's great to be here with Renewable UK at such an important time in history. I'm going to talk today a little bit about unlocking the potential for carbon capture and storage, and unlocking decarbonisation in Europe in the first instance, but again, that can be replicated on a global basis. A watershed time for us all, and perhaps a better explanation or a better starting point could be a catch-up moment. I'm sure all of us have had one of these. We are getting to the point where we have a new bottle of ketchup. We all know how it's going to go. We carefully take off the lid and we start hitting the back. And nothing happens. For a long time, nothing happens. And then you try a different tactic. You stick a knife down, nearly drop the knife in the ketchup, pull it out, it's all sticky ketchup everywhere. And then we revert to banging the drum. And that's a great analogy for where we're at the moment, because ultimately you get the ketchup coming out and hopefully you manage to get it not on your shirt and where it needs to be. But to stick with that analogy just for a moment, we've been considering the energy that's being put into unlocking the ability to decarbonize. You know, we're doing that here today as industry. We have partners that we're doing that with as well. And there are so many other parts of the world, so many other voices that join in that chorus, hitting the back of the ketchup. See, just behind us, there'll be a march a little bit later in the street to do that too. And I think what's great is that we can align on one thing. The world needs to change, and we all need to be a part of that. So, what does that mean for us in the context of carbon capture, which is a really key vehicle and avenue for decarbonisation? Well, I'm going to share with you an image that's very much part of the, sorry, there we go, very much part of the start of this journey. This is the first bit of ketchup, right? Landing on the sandwich. What we have here is the Northern Lights site, where carbon will be brought, CO2 in a liquefied form on the back of ships, will be brought and delivered for storage, final storage, that is, subsea. And we're going to talk a little bit about how that value chain works and how it can grow. But just for a moment to look at that site. That's really a ground zero scenario with lots of rubble moving around. And it looks a bit of a mess just at the moment. But that is the start of something really special, a watershed moment. So, why don't we look at what the value chain could look like and is going to look like for this backbone project. What you can see on the image from the line that runs down, and then most of what's on the right-hand side of the image, is, as I said earlier, CO2 storage on ships, and that runs into temporary storage on shore through a processing terminal and down subsea. Now, the first thing to say about this is that there is an immense amount of technology to be leveraged from other industries. And oil and gas is one of the key industries that is part of. Aker Solutions has a great heritage within oil and gas, and we've been leveraging different technologies for a very long time. And this is a great example of being able to accelerate into the energy transition. We don't have time to go into it today, but there's some other technology developments that we've driven in the past. The Åsgard subsea compression, for example, which leveraged technology from high-speed rail and leveraged technology from fiber optics. We would not be able to implement those solutions without learning from other industries and owning that into what we do. And we have a great opportunity to do that in the transition. So we have the topsides onshore facilities, which really is a place where the ships will come alongside. They dock. There's a new port jetty being built, and it will offload the liquid CO2 into storage tanks, and that will be passed offshore. And offshore, it will be put through a system of subsea equipment, where it'll be permanently stored subsea. And there's a great part of technology and digitalization that needs to be driven through into the project throughout, because that will ultimately enable the project to be operated remotely and further deman the system. What this also we just need to highlight here is there's a carbon capture site on the left-hand side, which is sort of the beginning of the process. And there are a number of anchor sites which form part of this Northern Lights project, which Equinor is driving, and we're delivering with them. And the point is that that is absolutely expandable. We see great opportunity for future CO2 sources to plug into the Northern Lights, and that's absolutely the vision that we have for it. Once this system is in place, that catch-up moment really comes into its own, and the marginal cost of new systems being plugged in is much more doable. So again, this is a key step forward into allowing for decarbonisation. And that's not just oil and gas carbon that's being caught. As mentioned earlier on one of the sessions, we discussed the cement industry, the fertilizer industry. These are industries that need to carry on and will carry on into the future, and we have to make sure that we can capture the CO2 and remove that from the system and the atmosphere. Okay, so here is an image of what the port facilities are going to look like. The artist's impression is always just a little bit different to how it finally ends up, but we've gotten good at 3D models and fully expect this to be up and running and on track. As you saw from the photo earlier, ground has been broken and we are moving ahead. And what we have now is the opportunity to drive through and bring all of that skill set from engineering, industrial, oil and gas projects, and applying that in a new and meaningful way. Let me shift for a moment just to the subsea system, because that's quite an important part of what's going to work and what we're leveraging. Some people might be concerned that CO2 is a very different gas to natural gas, and it is. There are different risks. It behaves differently if it leaks. And of course, we are looking in a very thorough manner at all of the safety issues and the journey to get this implemented. But this is something that we've done before, and a subsea is a great example of where this is done very, very frequently. What I will say now is we are not moving to a completely new system. What this is not is a first of a kind in every aspect. It's a first of a kind in terms of application. But the building blocks, the fundamentals, are well understood and have been there for some time. And what we're bringing in a particularly unique way is the integration of those technologies into the new era. So let's start with the subsea system then. So what you can see shown on the images is a fairly generic tree system with some manifolds and interconnections and so on. This infrastructure has been used for many years in the oil and gas industry, was pioneered in Norway, and we were part of that journey as well. And we've been working very hard to bring the lessons from oil and gas into the capture environment. Now, the operation is slightly different because, as I mentioned, you have temporary storage topsides at the terminal, and then we flow when there's shiploads of CO2 coming in. At other sites and in due course, there may be pipelines that come in and have a permanent flow of CO2 down into the reservoir. But in this case, it's almost like a batch application. And therefore, the system works differently. The valves are cycling a lot more. And in terms of making that work, and remember, operating remotely, it's important that we are able to monitor that remotely and intervene in the right way. So we're going on a journey, and we are making great strides in key points at key locations, and this is one of them. It's a real watershed moment for the industry and for us globally as a step forward to bring in the first permanent CO2 storage site that undoubtedly will grow. There are a number of sites in the UK and elsewhere where this technology and this learning will be leveraged to make sure we can bring the costs down and deliver well. We're working very closely with supply chain to do that. And as I say, it's a journey, and we're walking one step at a time. But here is another small step for man and a great leap for mankind. So with that, I'll finish. We'll take a short break, and we'll be back with the next section shortly. All right.
Hi, and welcome back to our second panel of the morning. My name's Vary Evans. I'm a principal analyst in Wood Mackenzie's Energy Transition Research Group, and I'm really happy to be joined today by three panellists who are going to help me talk through the topic of collaboration to navigate the energy transition. So I'm joined today by Stephen Bull, who's EVP of Renewables at Aker Solutions, by Victoria Cameron, who is External Relations Manager at Kellis Midstream, and by Edward Brady, who's Business Development Manager in the High Voltage Grids business at Siemens Energy. So we have a lot to talk about. We're going to talk about collaboration again, but since CCUS was covered so really nicely there by Jonathan and the other panel, what we're going to focus on is a bit more around offshore electrification and offshore power. So to set us up, I have just a couple of minutes to talk through a slide from some of our research at WoodMac. And what we're showing here is just real big picture stuff on where we are on emissions trajectory today globally, and then how we think we might forge a path to get towards 1.5 degrees, the upper limit of the Paris Agreement global warming, which is all the discussions that are going on behind us over the river. So think of the top line in that chart that you can see on the slide, think of that as the diagnosis. This is, in our view at WoodMac, the trajectory that we're on for global emissions if current policies evolve as we are expecting them to right now. Now, what's going on behind us might change that trajectory, and we hope it will. But what we're all aiming towards is the lower part of that curve. And we've sorted the paths to get there into a few different groups. And the message of this slide is really a kind of all the tools in the toolbox type message. All of the good work that the world is doing to electrify our transportation systems, our heating, our industries, to switch away from fossil fuel power wherever possible, and to use hydrogen in industry, for example, is really important. Carbon removal has a really important role to play here too. We reckon that carbon removal from carbon capture and some of the other technologies associated with that will contribute around about 20% of the overall global emissions reduction by 2050. So the nice pictures on the slide are kind of introducing the fact that we need all of these technologies, and we need them quickly to come together to reach these goals. So in my view, this kind of sets up this idea of collaboration really nicely. And what I'd love to do is to just bring the panel in now and to talk about collaboration from the perspective of your businesses. So at COP26 here, we've kind of seen the power of collaboration live and in person. What I'd love each of you to do is just to complete the sentence. So collaboration for me and my company means, Stephen?
Greater value in numbers.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go a little bit longer because we're not just sort of saying it means a lot to us. We've actually got it as part of our company values. So our values are tenacity, integrity, and partnership. And obviously, collaboration is absolutely sewn into partnership. So we do walk the talk. We won an award for that in the Southern North Sea, and we're taking that into energy transition.
Yeah, I think similar to Victoria, it's at the heart of what we do. It's kind of written into our mission. I mean, we're about working with customers and partners to enable the energy transition by our technological expertise and skills. So it is key. It's part of our DNA.
Yeah, and maybe for you personally, Ed, as well, you know, collaboration for you means?
Collaboration, I think there's a difference between a good project and a great project. When you talk to our teams that deliver projects where there's been a collaborative environment, you can see it in the eyes, the pride that they have in it. It's not just delivering the main common deliverables of sort of on time and on budget, but it's about doing a lot more, like for society and for local stakeholders. So I think you can see it's a pride thing. So yeah, it's the best way to work, I believe.
Yeah, I love that answer. You can see it in their eyes. Victoria, I'll put the same question to you.
Well, I work in an infrastructure company, And the nature of an infrastructure company is that you're just in the middle of everything. And you've got so many stakeholders, and if you're not collaborative, then you can't be an infrastructure company. And a large part of my job is actually working with stakeholders, managing stakeholders. You know, it's threaded through every single conversation we have, everything we do. It takes up a large part of my time, but it's very rewarding because we really do see results from having those open conversations. And what we do is try and level the playing field so that everybody has a common level of understanding.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. And I'll just complete the loop, Stephen, by coming back to for you personally, collaboration.
From a personal point of view, you know, it's really, you know, it's really inspiring to work with other companies and other people. So you build those personal connections to people as well. You know, you're sitting in steercos or board meetings together, so you know you have to get close to each other. And also, when it comes to actually when you front towards a client, so clearly, you know, a client when they talk to a collaboration or an alliance or a consortium, they want to hear just one voice. And actually, that's an important part you do. So you kind of take off your Arca Solutions hat and you put on your net zero hat, or you put on your collaboration hat that we have with Siemens Energy for HVDC offshore transmission. And that's really good because you get to question your own sort of how you work yourself in a company, but you bring in a whole network as well. So I think again you come in with something so much stronger than doing it all in house.
Yeah, and isn't it energizing to be here today? I mean, it's super for me anyway, the first event in a long time. So really happy to be here and in person. You mentioned the HVDC thing there, Stephen, and from my perspective, when we kind of look at things from the big picture with Mac, it's become increasingly obvious to us, I think, that the systems integration approach for offshore transmission of power is one of the most important things that can happen. And I know that, Ed, you probably have both some contributions to how you're tackling this. Ed, maybe come to you first about your work in the offshore transmissions.
Yes, it's a good point. So we're busy. So when we say offshore transmission, we can maybe define that or split that into three categories. So one, we're kind of busy connecting countries. So that kind of flow between countries, and we're kind of currently executing the Viking contract, which is a link between Denmark and the UK. And we've been recently awarded the Green Link contract, which is a link between Ireland and the UK. So that's kind of a key thing. But I suppose perhaps where our collaboration takes place is in connecting the offshore wind and connecting it to grids. And so far it's been kind of done. We've been doing it since 2008, but it's been done either by AC or DC technology, and I think with AC technology we've executed like 11 projects, 6 gigawatts, and DC a similar number, 6 gigawatts, but maybe a lesser number is for larger power. But effectively they've all been point to point, it's been done, it's kind of grown and evolved, but going forward with the sheer amount of volume of projects that are coming down the line, the coordination is needed, it's well recognized, and we're looking forward, I think in January to National Grid System Operators publication of the holistic network design that are following a review. So we look forward to that because we believe it's a good thing to do. I think the important thing is we mustn't slow down the projects that are in the pipeline. They must be executed on time to achieve targets, but certainly it's the right thing to do going forward.
And what is it about the HVDC that opens up so much more?
Well, HVDC is really about taking large lumps of power and sending it a long way. It is the best form for doing that. I think where we're evolving through in technology is in terms of having multi-terminal points, so you can actually connect things into it. So we're kind of evolving the technology in that respect. So it is a useful medium. It is probably the medium at the moment for actually sort of for shipping energy around from place to place, and doing it effectively.
Do you want to add?
Yeah, I think particularly you think of offshore wind developments now, and the natural development as you do as close to shore as possible in fairly shallow waters, but as you start to sort of fill up the space there, you need to move further out. And we see most of the larger offshore wind farms today are moving much farther from shore, but also getting larger as well. And you can see Sophia, an RWE project, you've got Dogger Bank with SSE and Equinor as well. I mean, these are 150, 170 kilometres from shore. So again, to have an HVDC solution where you have less energy loss, actually sort of opens up new areas of the seabed as well for producing power. So that's a great side. The other one I think as well is that what we've done for Arca Solutions, we've brought in again the collaboration that we've had with other partners like ABB as well, is that we've done a lot of electrification projects in Norway, and that's particularly to decarbonise the oil and gas emissions we have offshore. And what we take that from that knowledge and we put it into an international perspective. So for example, the collaboration that we have with Siemens Energy in the US. And this is really exciting because the US is a massively growth market for offshore wind at the moment. New York State has very clear decarbonisation targets, and the project that we're developing there for Ørsted and the Sunrise project and Eversource, their partner. I mean, this is the first of a kind for HVDC in the US for offshore wind, first of a kind for the client, first of a kind for us to develop here. So, I mean, when it comes to innovation in the energy transmission, energy transition, you know, we're really putting our money where our mouth is here.
Yeah, and so is the integration with wind and any other offshore energy, I mean, how does this figure into what you're working on? I guess it's part of the goal, is it? Or?
Yeah, I mean, at the moment it's really been quite simple, but it's point to point. But the challenge is really to integrate it. And I think, you know, we have the kind of challenge now, I think, in terms of the oil and gas kind of usage of electrification of oil and gas platforms, which is at its kind of infancy. So that's the next great challenge, really, to try and electrify that. And I'm sure Stephen will tell you more about that than I will. But
no, absolutely. And I think you know, we have to acknowledge that oil and gas, offshore oil and gas in the North Sea and other parts of the world is around for some decades yet, and therefore it's really important to tackle at pace and with some proper investment the decarbonisation of the Scope 1 and 2 emissions from that oil and gas. And Victoria, I think this is probably a great time to bring you in, actually, because I know that that's something that you've been working on. And I mean, would you like to tell us a little bit about what you've been working on there?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you go to where it started, which is, as you said, the longevity of our domestic supply, but making sure it's as low carbon as possible. And part of that is, certainly enshrined in a deal, is the North Sea Transition Deal, which is agreement between the upstream industry and government to become net zero by 2050. And part of that, and only part of it, back to your toolkit, is your emissions offshore in order to extract the resources. The power turbines offshore are effectively jumbo jet engines. And so you might see some dramatic pictures of offshore platforms with a flare. That's not actually the majority of the emissions offshore. It's from these power turbines, which constitute 70% of the total emissions in the UK North Sea. So what you need to do there is electrify. That's the answer. We see a great fit with Kellis Midstream in the bridging the gap between electrification and the upstream industry. And we have the capability to invest, and we are backed by some of the world's largest investment funds in BlackRock and GIC. So we've got that capability, but what we don't have is necessarily the technical expertise. We've got commercial expertise in this kind of thing. We've got the infrastructure ownership expertise, but we didn't have the technical expertise. So we've been working with Aker Solutions and ABB for the last 2 years to deepen our knowledge on what's required in such a complex issue. And one of the big issues is the economics. The economics are not good. So what do you do with that? Well, you have economies of scale. You need to bring more people in. You need more upstream companies to work together, which is a challenge in itself. Another way to address the economics is bringing in offshore wind. So actually the industrial power price is very high and really makes the economics very challenging for offshore platforms when you add in the capital expenditure for the infrastructure. And so if you link in offshore wind directly, so you try and avoid the onshore grid and industrial levies, then it suddenly becomes, unlocks the projects a bit more, as well as have the power as green as possible. So you're really trying to decarbonise as much as possible. So it's fascinating because you've got a lot of operators having to work together, and then you bring in the different team, as Shetal said earlier, of the renewables and offshore wind sector, and you know, you need somebody to integrate, and we want to be that integrator.
Yeah, fantastic. I mean, it sounds to me like there's maybe a little sprinkling of faith or trust, or just you've got to believe that this is the right thing to do here as well, because You know, saying that you're taking action and investing to prolong oil and gas production for another however long is maybe not a particularly popular opinion right now, but it sounds to me like there are very good reasons to do that, and the different roles that your organisations and the government plays here is pretty fascinating to me. As well, you mentioned, Victoria, around having upstream operators come together to make this happen. I don't know if you've got any experiences of that to share, but I'm also really interested to hear about the role of system integrators and technology providers in making that happen as well. I'll throw that open. Who wants to pick that one up first?
Can I maybe just pick up and think about the addressable market here? Because I think when you think of oil and gas production, most people think it's a big oil and gas platform. Oil and gas is produced either in a pipeline or shipped. Do you actually need a lot of energy to produce energy? And that goes throughout. You need a lot of energy to produce wind turbines as well as solar panels. So the use of energy within the mix here is an important addressable market, and essentially we need to decarbonise it. So if you think of the UK, there's about 2 million barrels of oil equivalent coming from the North Sea, and that will continue for a long time. It won't be turned off overnight. That CO2 emissions coming from the sectors, there's about 13 million tonnes in the UK, there's about 10 million tonnes in a year of CO2 emissions coming from Norway, and you've got probably about 6 to 7 coming from Denmark and the Netherlands as well. And so the whole of the North Sea itself, the whole basin here, is an area where we do need to decarbonise. I think this is the exciting thing about the cooperation that we have with Kellis Midstream, is that we're not only thinking about how do we decarbonise oil and gas, but how do we put infrastructure in place that when those oil and gas fields will disappear over time and be decommissioned, then we actually have infrastructure in place, not just to produce power, but we have actually cables around the UK as well, and also linking to an ocean grid, which we will see is essential for the European Union and every European country to actually decarbonise. So we are putting something in place here which will be worth valuable in decades to come.
Yeah, so it's future-proofing in a way.
Absolutely,
yeah. And Victoria, anything else to add?
I mean, it's having that longer-term vision, isn't it? And you mentioned the offshore transmission network review as well, which is more to do with offshore wind, but of course can be associated with any other electrification infrastructure, interconnectors or offshore oil and gas electrification. So that is a really interesting initiative, and I know you've been more involved in it.
Yeah, and it is, and I think if you look at the ScotWind initiatives, and we await the results of those, but there's a great opportunity there, I think, to actually link and join the dots, to actually supply power to Scotland, but also to supply power to oil and gas. I mean, from a Siemens Energy perspective, it's a really interesting challenge because through our history and acquisition, we've actually supplied a lot of the gas turbines and compressors that are out there. So we've got a lot of the guys that service and maintain it, and they're actually quite really geared up for the challenge of actually changing it over and cleaning up the system. So we've got our transmission people who have the expertise to take power from A to B, and we have these guys who are quite have the knowledge on site. So we're kind of keen to get involved, but we are waiting for that kind of steer as to how to do it. So, but yeah, in terms of collaboration, it's a great challenge. I think we're at the early days of it. We're certainly up for it.
Yeah.
And I think if you don't just look at the offshore aspect, but link it to the onshore aspect and the industrial clusters, and I know we've already covered some of the industrial clusters, but from our perspective, we have a hydrogen project in Teesside at our terminal as part of the East Coast cluster, and that's a visionary project. The whole cluster, the sheer size of the decarbonisation and the amount of jobs that can be created is huge. So it's all linked, absolutely, and very exciting.
Completely agree. Yeah, so I saw a tweet yesterday, and maybe some of our audience will have seen it as well, which took the view that this COP26 was business as usual, etc. And my take is that there's probably a bit more to it than that. And I wondered if, so the industrial cluster strikes me, Victoria, that is a really great example of breaking the business as usual. Is there kind of any other examples that you can think of? And it could be big picture stuff, or it could be things on the ground, breaking the business as usual through collaboration.
Yeah, I mean, I think the micro level ones are interesting. It's what we do in our daily lives, for example, is all contributing towards it. But give you an example, I mentioned an interconnector project that we do from Denmark to the UK. And on the UK side, typically when you're setting up through construction, you put in construction cabins. And if you're not near a kind of grid point, then you'll ultimately use diesel generators to provide the electrical power. And that is what we were set up to do when we started the project. But then through another collaboration with a smashing company called Geopura, we started creating hydrogen fuel cells. And so we thought, well, why don't we use these hydrogen fuel cells to provide electricity and heat rather than using diesel? And the kind of project director for our customer was very, very so strong supporter of collaborative behaviour. Said, yeah, let's look into it. And ultimately we did it. So it's kind of those small things which make a kind of contribution. Now that kind of behaviour, the ideal would be to kind of take that on board to the next projects and roll it out and really kind of innovate to really sort of make a difference. So at that small level, they all add up. But then there's the macro things as well, which are going on across the water, which are important. But yeah, I think there's a whole range of things that we can do and are doing.
Absolutely. Steve?
I mean, life doesn't feel business as usual in Arca Solutions.
No.
Definitely not. You know, there's so many first-of-a-kinds of projects that we're developing now. So, you know, we transition the company. And just to name a few of them, I mean, we had Jonathan talk about Northern Lights, which is, you know, sort of groundbreaking CO2 capture type of technology and storage, which is a very repeatable business model. We're going to see more and more of these smaller scale CO2 capture and then storage offshore in the North Sea. We're doing the largest ever CO2 capture of a cement plant in Brevik in southern Norway, which is part of this Northern Lights Longship Consortium that's coming through as well. Never been done before. We're also doing a first of a kind when it comes to floating offshore wind. So we're actually developing floating offshore wind farm, 88 megawatts, which will power oil and gas operations and reduce their CO2 emissions, you know, the equivalent of 300,000 cars. So there's huge amounts in the portfolio which are first of a kind in that sense as well. So it really doesn't feel business as usual from my point of view.
Just want to add one to that. We're doing this really great project in Chile, actually, working with Porsche. So we're taking onshore wind, converting it to hydrogen, ultimately converting it into synthetic fuel. So it's actually started construction now, and I think we're looking to have our demo site available next year. And by 2026, we're looking to be reducing 500 million litres per year. So we're kind of scaling up. I mean, those kind of things are happening now, and they are really exciting. The projects that Jonathan mentioned, I mean, it's just fabulous. I think as mentioned earlier, it's a great time to be an engineer or to be coming into this industry now, and I think it's some exciting things that are happening.
Yeah, that Chile project, it is absolutely fascinating. I mean, we probably don't have time to go into it just now, but if anyone wants to look at it, it's absolutely fascinating looking that up. So I've got one last question for you all, and it's to do with, I guess, making this all sustainable, keeping it going. And Victoria, I'd love to get your thoughts on the role of diversity in collaboration and what makes a difference there.
So one of the main barriers to collaboration is competitive behaviours. And I'm not talking about competition law or natural kind of competitive tension that allows good value. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm just talking about the behaviours, competitive behaviours. And we've been through a journey in the UK North Sea where the competitive behaviours were very prevalent, and the regulator came in with a bit of a stick, to be honest, to say, you know, you need to collaborate. And then of course the carrot was there as well, because nobody was making very much money, and you really needed to do something differently. So I've been through that journey. I was in a previous role where I had a very positive experience about collaboration. I was performance manager, and I went out to many companies to just go and speak to them, to share information about what they were doing. And everybody was very open with me. I did a bit of research beforehand. Each time I spoke to them, I said, could you speak about X, Y, Z? And they did, and they shared information really openly, and everybody embraced that collaboration. I went across to Norway as well to speak to 2 companies. There was just one thing that I think we could work on a little bit more there, and it's a learning that I think we're still going through, which is potentially diversity. Whenever I went to these companies, I would always ask them, would you like to hear anything from me? My company was becoming very well known for having some of the lowest operating costs in the region, and really making very good action in terms of efficiency gains. Nobody wanted to hear from me. They were very happy to share information with me, but nobody took me up on the offer to hear information from me. So it was a one-way conversation. Apart from one company over in Norway, not one of them, but it was actually Equinor. so the second company I spoke to, were the exception to the rule. What do you think the difference there was?
Norwegian spirit?
Well, I mean, it took a while for me to kind of work it out. But I think the difference was that in this one instance, I was dealing with women. All the other instances, I was dealing with men. And I'm not necessarily kind of being over critical there. I'm just thinking about behaviours and what's ingrained in culture, especially oil and gas culture, is that competitive behaviours. And they were really happy to share information with me, but they were not particularly interested in admitting that they might need information back.
Yeah.
And there was that kind of professional pride there, which I absolutely respect. But what a good information exchange I had with Equinor.
Yeah, sometimes we just need to let go of our own pride a little bit, don't we?
Yeah, I think it's subconscious,
yeah.
But it was fascinating for me to go through that journey.
Steve, I'd like to give you the last word, just on a real quick kind of sum up on how we make sure that we are doing our best to keep this collaborative spirit going in the face of maybe some tricky times ahead.
Yeah. No, it's a good point. There are, when you build these collaborations, you sort of have all this momentum and excitement around it, and then you hit some bumps in the road, either through your own partnership, or you find that maybe policy direction or political direction is not actually something we expect, and we need that. We need to work that completely together. So I think one of the most important things that you build these close personal relationships. You actually look and you say, Victoria said, ask questions, be curious about each other, learn from each other, and you build these things over time. And I think also you'll find that there is no silver bullet for these business models. What we're developing now within our, what we're doing with Kelos, what we're doing with Siemens Energy, the way we work together, we'll find other options, we'll find other things, but actually working together and keeping and maintaining that, I think that would give us a bit more inspiration as well, because again, first of a kinds, policies are changing so much, we need different types of solutions, but we do that better together than on our own.
Yeah, inspiration was the word that jumped out for me there. Well, look, thank you all so much. Really, really value your input. I think that's been a super panel. I'm going to wrap it up here, and we're going to take a short break just before our very last session. Thanks.
Okay, so to wrap this dialogue up, first of all, I think it's been an excellent venue to have this kind of dialogue. Behind us, it is to do about politics. The dialogue is going. It is discussing the transformation, and also then, as we've done here today, discussing the solutions, how we're actually going to be a key player in handling the task of delivering to the whole energy mix. And now this last session is about trying to point at the future. And for me, having sort of 3 decades in oil and gas, I'm entering into this next phase, and it will be a lot of change for me personally. But then my guest here now is in a different place. He's more in the beginning of your career, Ryan Fernando, and part of our company. And now we'll have a chat about where you are on your journey. And could you perhaps start by describing a little bit about your career and how you sort of got motivated to jump into our energy service company and do your job here?
Yeah, sure, thank you. And it's great to be here and part of this session. So, yeah, I guess the career journey started, and I guess I'd probably take you back to when I was at school. And I entered the industry through probably a bit more of a non-traditional route than you maybe typically would. And I think what I got out of coming through that non-traditional route was a lot of exposure to a lot of different aspects that I think have really benefited me in my career journey so far. But when I was at school, I was pretty unsure of what I wanted to do. I left school and I was actually working part-time at McDonald's, and it became my full-time job. However, I was quickly promoted into a manager role at McDonald's, and but soon after that, I kind of got to the point where that wasn't really my calling, and I decided to pursue some of my interests in technology and engineering. I was really a hands-on person, so that's where I started my career at Aker Solutions in 2013 as an electronics apprentice. Through my apprenticeship, I was exposed to a lot of different things. I'm allowed to build relationships with other apprentices, mentors, and really throughout the time I was fortunate as well to win a couple industry awards, one of which was the Oil and Gas UK's Apprentice of the Year. And it also allowed me to further my education. I did my bachelor's degree part-time in electronic and electrical engineering. So my main motivators coming into the industry were, wanting to be hands-on, work on exciting technology, and be involved. Especially being up in Aberdeen, it was a very usual industry to go into as well, and seeing other friends and also my dad was in the industry too. So that was really some motivations coming into the industry.
And now you're not a beginner. You have what is 8 years in our industry, then predominantly oil and gas. And I guess could you sort of reflect around whether or not you feel sort of tied to oil and gas, and know what your feelings around the energy transition as we enter into? Yeah.
So for me, again, pushing the boundaries on the young or early careers professional now. But no, it's been great. I've come through my apprenticeship. I moved into a leadership role within our workshop facility, and more recently doing a quality role on one of our largest low carbon projects, the GANS project with the subsea gas compression. I think the experience I've had, the skills I've learned, it only excites me for the opportunities that are to come with the energy transition, should I say. I don't feel tied. I feel that since I've been in the industry, there's been a lot of change, and that change excites me. And I think the skills I've gained, I look forward to transferring them and being part of and contributing to the energy transition. For me, starting off at the start of my career, knowing very little about the energy industry, coming through and having opportunity and experiences, one of which was I was included or asked to be part of the North Sea Transition Forum, which is key in the energy transition. And I never saw myself at the start of my career to be in that context and be in that atmosphere where I'm presenting to senior industry leaders, representing that early careers professionals, and trying to put across that, securing that next generation is vital for the energy transition. And for me, that's where I really do see, investing in people and developing them is where we'll see and get that success in the energy transition.
So I'm saying that I feel that who we are and what we represent in oil and gas is very relevant for the new roles to take within renewables areas. You're really the living example of that, working on the Jan's technology. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Very good. And then someone said last night that there must be no better place to be than young and sort of a real sort of having insight from oil and gas, but then take on this huge energy transition. The opportunity space there are enormous, and you've been engaged and forward-leaning, taking the opportunities to be a young voice in many of these different settings, as you allude to. But now in our company, going forward, taking this challenge head on, and for the surroundings, how can you and other sort of young talents in our organization and in the industry best contribute, do you think?
Yeah, well, I think for me it's about grabbing those opportunities. For us to contribute, it is being bold, speaking out. And using, and don't be afraid to share your opinions. I think the energy transition, we're going to be faced with challenges that, maybe even yourself and other, seasoned industry leaders haven't yet experienced. So, we'll learn and evolve together. And I think the ideas, the skills, especially in the digital side, is where we can really contribute. For me, personally, I think with the route I've taken and having that hands-on experience through being in the workshop and understanding the products, seeing those products develop and moving forward into the newer technologies that are for the renewables, really will be where we can play a part.
I have this feeling that we are really listening more to each other now across generations and in society. Do you have the same feeling?
I do. I mean, for example, being involved in the North Sea Transition Forum, that's senior industry leaders wanting to hear from the early careers. I feel that within our company there is a lot more of dialogue, between I guess you could say the top and the bottom. But for me, it's going to be crucial for that, and I think part of that is securing the next generation, and through the dialogue with yourself and with others, I think that's where we will see the success for the energy transition. So yeah, for me, some advice I would give to others out there, in their early careers would be, be bold, be creative, take on those challenges. Don't be afraid to speak up. I think I've benefited from it, and I think others too have, and join in the conversation, and when you do challenge, challenge with a solution.
Yeah. I agree. Grab the opportunity and be curious and open to learning. Next time you can take me into your digital toolbox and teach me some tricks. So, and I guess we have to round off. But thank you for those reflections. Our company have this purpose defined, that we are actually here to solve global energy challenges for future generations. You're pointing at the future for our company here today. And I think the things that we've been discussing in this session this morning is really sort of our main focus points here in Scotland during this conference. I've learned about just transition, and that resonates so much with how we are thinking about the challenges ahead and how we want to cope with them. Standing on the shoulders of who we are and what we know from oil and gas, and bringing that gradually over and to become relevant for the new opportunities and the renewables areas. And there we had stories about the technology, how, for instance, subsea technology is directly transferable and the solutions really for renewables projects. And we also brought in the topic of collaboration, that we want to solve this together as an industry, lift the whole industry, and also find partners that makes a lot of sense when taking on these new type of industrial challenges. And then, as we said, also pointing at the future by the next generation Aker Solutions leaders. So thank you for attending it, and thank you for listening in.
Thank you.